Hey, friends. We hope you're enjoying the start of the summer. You got your sunshine, late nights, maybe even a few unexplained noises in the dark. I know we've had some. Just wanted to drop by in real quick and let you know that season 4 of Generation X Paranormal is almost here. And trust us, it's our most haunted, hilarious, and heartfelt season yet. So mark your calendars for July 1st because we're dropping a big announcement about what's coming next. Until then, stay curious and maybe keep a flashlight handy. Hey, everybody, welcome to the first Classic GXP show. Basically, this is just kind of going through some classics of ours that were really just me before Nicole got into it. But I kind of wanted to start off with the Amityville murders and kind of the paranormal fallout. This is very controversial, and I'm certain we'll probably end up doing our own show on this on the main show. But yeah, check this out and tell us what you think. I'd like to open the show for just a second and acknowledge that a lot of events we're going to talk about that happened in Amityville that night. Okay, we're going to discuss the crime and its brutal nature, and we're going to discuss the paranormal activity that happened afterwards, or we'll just say the reported paranormal activity. And we're going to talk about things that have happened since. But I'd like to open up by saying and acknowledging there were 6 deaths that night. There was 2 parents and 4 children, one 18, one 13, one 12, and one 9, all of which met gruesome end. I'd like to acknowledge that and give a moment of peace for their souls. And now, on with the show. On November 13th, 1974, the small sleepy town of Amityville, Long Island, was rocked to its core. Around 6:30 p.m. on that date, a young Ronald Joseph DeFeo Jr. went into the Henry's bar and declared, "You gotta help me. I think my mother and father are shot." Now, the patrons of Henry's bar decided to, give him a hand. So a small group of people went to the home, and it was close to the bar, and they did in fact find that the parents were shot inside the house. So one of the people of the group decided, let's make an emergency call, as any normal, rational person would do. So they called the county police, the Suffolk County Police, and upon arrival, the county police searched the home and found that 6 members of the family were shot in their beds. Now that's the facts. And that's what we're going to focus on in the very beginning of the show, the facts. We're going to go into the long list of possible scenarios and whether he acted alone and whether or not there was some kind of mob conspiracy. And then, of course, the family that moved into the home after the events, and then the proposed or possible paranormal events that happened. So we're going to start with the facts. So we do know, in fact, that it happened on November 13th. We believe sometime around 1 o'clock in the morning. That is when the crime was committed. Now, we're going to talk about the way that it was at least explained in the very beginning. In the very beginning, Junior, we'll call him, confessed the entire thing. Granted, when they first brought him in, he said a mob hitman came through and assassinated my family. And honestly, the last day he recanted that. So probably just could not see the inconsistencies through. And his version of events just kind of did not really do him any justice. So he abandoned that and later recanted and said, yes, okay, I killed all of them. Now, this was his admission. Now, whether you want to believe if it was coerced or, if there was some sort of a ploy from an outside agency to get him to confess, we don't know. We'll never know. It's just something that was brought up later. So they asked him what happened, and he confessed to the crimes. So that is the facts as we know it of that day. So the trial. Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s trial began October 14th of 1975, almost an entire year after the murders. His defense attorney, William Weber, was going to mount an affirmative defense of insanity, basically saying that he killed his family in self-defense because he heard their voices plotting against him. And he had an insanity plea that was supported by a psychiatrist for the defense, Daniel Schwartz. So, psychiatrist of the prosecution, however, Dr. Harold Zolan, maintained that he was not insane, that he may have taken heroin, LSD, and he had antisocial personality disorder, but he was well aware of the actions of his crime at that time. Trials Judge Thomas Stark declared DeFeo's crimes were, quote, the most heinous murders committed in Suffolk County since its founding. So on November 21st, DeFeo was found guilty on all 6 counts of second-degree murder. And then on December 4th of 1975, Judge Thomas Stark sentenced DeFeo to 6 sentences of 25 years to life. So with that and the facts in front of you, I would imagine you would think at this particular point, this is a pretty open and shut case. And I'm sure that the people in that time frame thought the same thing. We had a crime scene, we had a criminal, we had a trial and a conviction. He admitted to the crimes. Granted, he was trying to get an insanity plea out of it. And who knows, maybe he could have gotten it, maybe he couldn't have, maybe if he would have tried an appeal, who knows. But we had a well-rounded crime scene, we had a confession, we had everything. So open shut, everybody moves on, grieve the people that were lost, and, unfortunately the world moves on. So here's where some interesting parallels come into play. All 6 victims were found face down in their beds with no signs of struggle. The police investigation also said that the weapon used had no sound suppressor, and there were no evidence of sedation having been administered to any of the DeFeo family. Now, Jr. claimed that he drugged his family during his interrogation, but there was nothing found in their systems. Now, at the time of the murder and the conviction, the weapon that was used to perpetrate the crime was considered to be a Marlin .336 Charlie rifle, which is a shotgun. It's a .35 caliber shotgun, but it's a shotgun. Very, very loud fire. And there's going to be some conjecture of other weapons to follow, but we're just sticking with the facts at this particular time. And the facts will tell you that the father was shot twice, the mother was shot twice, and each one of the siblings were shot once apiece. Without a silencer, I can tell you that being a man who shot many weapons, both in the military and his personal life, any kind of discharge of a weapon makes a tremendous amount of sound. Not to mention there is a smell that's involved. The sound is so violent that it creates almost a concussion in confined spaces, especially with a shotgun. So I guess that is a very interesting fact for me to wrap my head around, that all of the victims were found face down in their bed, and that there was no struggle. And for me, that is a very difficult fact to wrap my head around. So now that we've got the facts cleared, we're going to move on to some of the things that are potentially factual. So Ronald DeFeo Jr. states that he had a very volatile relationship with his father, Ronald Sr., and they owned a body shop, or I believe just a Buick dealership very close in that area. and he worked there at that particular shop. There was a lot of conjecture between him and his father about how they did business. There was a lot of violence between the two, and from my understanding, Ronald DeFeo Sr. may have been a very difficult and violent person to have as a father. So what does that mean for DeFeo Jr.? Well, you would imagine the kind of things that you see happen with a lot of people who live a life like that. He was a very troubled youth, a lot of drug addiction, violence of his own. He's had a lot of struggles and a lot of demons, but it also grew a hatred for his father, and most likely a hatred for a lot of people that were associated with his father. Now, on surface level, the motives behind the killings were somewhat unclear, and even to this day is very, very gray. I will say, though, he did ask the police if he had any rights to collect on his father's life insurance. So I believe the prosecution suggests that was the motive behind the killing. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. In addition to that, there was some mob ties to the family. And, whether or not that had anything to do with the deaths at the time or what was going on, somehow it factored into Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s mind frame. And one of the things he was concerned about during the trial was he didn't want to say anything bad about his mother because her father was Michael Grant Sr. And his father's uncle would have probably had a little bit of anger behind him. You see, his father's uncle was Peter DeFeo. He was a capo for the Genovese family. So there was some pretty close ties to the mob at that particular point in time. Now, after the killing, DeFeo went on to have many different varying accounts of how the killings were carried out. The one that probably sticks out the most to me was an interview that he gave outlining that it was not him that acted as the sole perpetrator of this crime, that in fact it was his sister that was basically the genesis and the mastermind behind the killings. Now, I can go on and tell you what he said, but it's probably better you hear from him. In an interview with Dr. Stephen Hodge, he goes on to explain,
how can one person go through the house and kill 6 people the way they think they were killed?
Apparently, Mr. DeFeo has a new story now, but at the time of his trial, he admitted to having killed his entire family. So, Mr. DeFeo, tell me what happened.
I went in there to scare him. I didn't go in there to kill him. What had happened was, Dawn said something smart. I said, if you want to get rid of Mommy and Daddy, I said, I'll go get your gut. So I said, here you go. What do you want me to do with that? I said, it's all ready to go. Just pull her hand back and squeeze the trigger. And everybody was sleeping except her and me. His door was like 3/4 closed. I went in there and I said, hey, fat man, get up. And he started to get up. I'll never forget that. I got scared. My sister looked at me. She says, do it. I said, do it. I said, yeah, you do it. We had a split second. He was getting up. I said, do it. I said, yeah, you do it. So then when I seen his body getting ready to make the move, I just pulled the trigger. After I pulled the trigger, I hit the lever, shot him again. My mother yelled, oh my God, run. Now my mother went with a hand. Towards the side of a bed. My mother had a 30-year revolver. When another one for that, I said, oh. My sister looked at me. I said, are you happy now? I said to her. She looked at me. She said, oh my God, look what you did. I said, look what I did. I said, this was your idea, not mine. I said, look what I did. I said, Mommy got shot on top of it. I left the house and I told my sister, I'll be back. Don't do nothing. Let me see what we're going to do. There's things that got to be done. I got to get out of here because I can't deal with this. Leave everything alone. And I was really messed up. The more I thought about it, the worse it got. I was driving with the window open. The radio was off. The heat was off. And I was just thinking of driving. Stopping, trying to figure out what I should do, where I should go. Then I finally came home. I drove in the driveway. All the lights were on. I walked in the house. They were doing, twice. Then I went up the stairs. I went all the way up the stairs. I got to the top. And my sister had a pink shade rug, Allison, in her room. And I looked at her and looked down. It was blood, a puddle of blood. I said, oh my God. And I had two brothers' room. I went in there. They were dead. I see a hole in both their backs. Oh, God. Then I ran upstairs. I didn't put no light on. I ran up the stairs. And Dord says, oh my God, but what are you doing here? Grabbed the gun, tried to blow my head off. Tried to shoot me. Again, it was in my face. So now she's a big girl. I got in a wrestling match with her. And nobody was fell down or anything. I got in a wrestling match with her trying to get this gun away. I had the gun straight up in the air. And I got my left hand trying to do something to it. I slammed it down in the bed. I grabbed them all off the floor. And like I said, I hit the lever on the gun. A live round came out of the gun. The gun went off. I thought I shot her in the neck.
Now, this, of course, was an insane departure from what he had said prior to that. You know, he had claimed that he went and killed his entire family on his own. So bringing his sister Dawn into it absolves him, I guess, in his mind, of the murder of his siblings. And I don't know that makes it any better or worse for him, but at the end, there was a murder. Now, keep in mind, when Dr. Hodge interviewed him, this was 31 years after the incident, so he had a lot of time to sit there and think about what he had done and the crime that he had perpetrated on his own family. So in 1990, DeFeo filed a motion basically saying he wanted to have his conviction vacated. Basically supporting that Dawn had an unknown assailant, fled the house before he could get a look at him, killed their parents, and Dawn subsequently killed their siblings. And of course, by his admission in that interview, said that he only killed Dawn, that it was an accident. They struggled over a rifle, and he thought that he had shot her in the neck. Now, of course, this motion was denied. Basically, there was no evidence. There was no real evidence that anybody else was in the home. There was no evidence stating that Dawn had anything to do with the murders. It was just a very airtight case, so they thought. And there was really no evidence precluding otherwise, stating that the only perpetrator of this crime had to be Ronald DeFeo Jr. In November of 2000, DeFeo met with Rick Osuna. I'm hoping I pronounced that correctly. And he was an author of a book. It was called The Night the DeFeos Died. That was published in 2002. So definitely a good read if you want something to pick up and read. But he had claimed that in this interview that he had allegedly committed the murders with his sister Dawn and two friends. And you can look up the name of these friends. I'm not going to do it because I think that we could probably state that this was all fictitious, but that he had committed the crimes with Dawn and two of her friends. DeFeo also claimed that his family had orchestrated a contract on his life, that they were going to kill him for some dealings having to do with the mob. And in addition to that, DeFeo also claimed that Dawn committed these murders because the police found traces of unburnt gunpowder on Dawn's nightgown. Now, that little piece of evidence basically gave, well, at least in Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s mind, they gave him license or at least an opportunity to claim that she fired the weapon because it was unburnt powder. Well, fortunately for us and unfortunately for him, a ballistics expert said that could happen discharged through the muzzle of the weapon because she was in such close proximity to the muzzle when it was discharged. So that's how you get that unburnt gunpowder on the nightgown that had nothing to do with firing the weapon itself. As for the crime scene and the aftermath of the crime, that's probably where our story is going to end with that particular part of it. Of course, he was tried, he's convicted. Ronald DeFeo Jr. never saw the light of day again, and he did pass away just recently in 2021 of unknown causes, incidentally. Now moving on to the Lutz family. Approximately 1 year after the murders, a new family moved in, the Lutzes. They moved in to 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. Now, by George Lutz's own interpretation, the first week was fine. They absolutely had no problems. It was a beautiful home. They got it at a discount. The realtor did disclose that the murders had happened in that home, and the family discussed it, and they knew it was going to be probably somewhat sensationalized, but they couldn't walk away from the deal. It was just too good. And they went ahead and made a decision as a family to purchase the home. So with that, they got a great deal and they moved in. This was a very beautiful house. It's a 5-bedroom Dutch colonial style. It had a distinctive gambrel roof. It also had a swimming pool, boathouse, and was located on a canal. Absolutely breathtaking property. Now, not only did they get such a good deal on the home, but the DeFeos also purchased the home with some, in fact, much of the DeFeo family furniture still in the home. And it was included for about $400 part of the deal. I have to admit, that's probably something I would not want to purchase a home with. Even knowing that there was murders in the home, let's go ahead and buy a house and keep the furniture the family had that was murdered in this home. Man, it's a great idea. Now, the Lutz family, of course, was George and Kathleen. And Kathleen had a prior marriage. So from that previous marriage, she had 3 children. Daniel, who was 9, Christopher, who was 7, and Melissa, they called Missy, was 5. Oh, and they also had a dog named Harry. So the Lutz moved in on December 18th of 1975. And a friend of George Lutz, he learned about the history and said, hey, you should probably get that place blessed. And at the time, I think George said, okay, yeah, it's not a bad idea. He was a non-practicing Methodist, and, Kathy was a non-practicing Catholic, but I think everybody kind of came to the same rationalization that it's probably a good idea to have some higher power step in, because there was some really evil stuff that happened in that house prior to that. So George went ahead and got a hold of a priest that he knew. He was actually, interesting enough, he was a lawyer and a judge for the Catholic court, but he was also a psychotherapist. So I thought that was a pretty interesting turn of events. So while the Lutzes were unpacking, the father came and he started to bless the home. This was on the afternoon of December 18th of 1975. So he went into the building to carry out the rites. Of course, if you don't know how that works, the father walked through the home with a device and started flicking holy water throughout the home, and he began to pray. And by his account, he heard a masculine voice demand that he get out. So when leaving the house, the father didn't mention it to them, probably didn't want to disturb the fact that this family just got a heck of a deal on this house and didn't want to freak them out. So, he said, see you later, have a good one, and off he went. Okay. So on December 24th, he called George and said, hey, you should probably stay out of the second floor room that I heard this voice. And it was the former bedroom of Mark and John DeFeo. But in a very strange turn of events, that phone call was cut short by some sort of static. Now, allegedly, after this visit, the father became very ill. He had a high fever and blisters on his hands, similar to a stigmata. And if you're not sure what a stigmata is, of course you can look it up, but has something to do with a physical manifestation of the injuries that Jesus Christ sustained while he was crucified. But at first, the family didn't notice anything unusual in the house. But that peace was only going to last for just a little while longer. Now, Lutzes did attempt, I believe, in mid-January of 1976 to have the house blessed again. That experience, from what I understand, would turn out to be their final night in the home. So the interesting thing is the Lutzes declined to give a full account of the events because, according to them, they were just too frightening. So, having said that, The Lutzes purchased a home. 28 days later, they hightailed it out of there and left every last thing they owned behind. Something scared them out of that house, and they left the entire thing in 28 days. Now, of course, we know that is not where this story ends. There was a book published about the entire incident, the 28 days. Now, the author, Jay Anson, never actually spoke with the family. In fact, it was through submission of 45 hours of recorded tape sessions, and that's what he used basically as a basis of the book. And of course, it was a landslide of a popular book. I think it broke around 10 million copies. I mean, it was huge. It basically took the world by storm. The Lutzes were the toast of the town. They had interviews with Good Morning America. They had so much publication done on them that, of course, as Hollywood does, there were some rights sold, and they're going to make a movie out of this thing. And boy, did they ever. Now, some interesting things came about from that book. There were a lot of disputes about accuracy and things of that nature, but just to get an accounting, though, of the reported paranormal experiences that the Lutzes did go through, I thought maybe you'd want to hear from the Lutzes themselves. Now, in an interview with Good Morning America, they went on to say,
well, at first, just moving into the house was fine. It's a lovely house, and we enjoyed moving in. Within a while, Kathy's hand had been touched by something that we discussed and couldn't explain. It was just something unseen.
We also had hordes of flies that would appear within 2 rows, and no matter how many times we would kill them, they would reappear. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4 within 1 row, that could be commonplace. When you're dropping over 100...
This was the winner.
Yes.
We were talking about how many?
Over 100.
100 flies.
One time. And then you'd go around and kill them. They'd be lying on the floor. You'd come back an hour later and they would be there all like that.
More of a gelatin kind of substance that we thought the children had somehow mixed something up and spilled it around the house. The next time it happened, the kids were at school, and there was just no way to explain how it got there.
Did you all call, a contractor or a carpenter or anybody to come and look in it and try to...
We had several repairmen come in. Telephone repairmen came 3 times because each time you try and communicate with the priest, we would run into faulty connections. We had extreme fluctuations in heat, between 40 and 50 degree fluctuations. 3 times the serviceman came in. One time he was there, he heard the furnace functioning, and yet there was no heat within the house. The temperature was at 40, and yet thermostat read 80.
Okay, now, but did you have somebody inspect the entire heating system? Goodness knows those of us who live in North know what can happen with heating systems in a house, especially old houses. George, there was also something about black in the toilets, the water black and making the ceramic, the bowls or whatever.
China itself, it wasn't in the water. The china itself turned black, and at first it was one bathroom and then another, so that by the time the investigators got there, a number of them was still black. They were still that way. There was never any reasonable explanation.
Did you have a plumber come out? I mean, when you first spotted...
No, there wasn't a problem with the water. The water was good.
Was normal. But did you invite any contractor or somebody like that just to come say, hey, what's wrong with the toilets?
No, because one of the things we found is the keyholes would ooze a black substance, which was of the same nature and appearance as that which was on the porcelain in the toilets. And when the investigative team came on March 6, 1976, the substance was still on the keyholes, and they were able to obtain samples of it because it was never in a moist condition, and they wouldn't do physical damage to the door. In other words, call out a piece of wood without our consent.
So that's a pretty brief accounting of what the Lutzes claimed to have happened that evening or in those 28 days. And of course, the subsequent book, and gosh, they made, I'm looking at it now, something like 25, 30 movies having to do with the Amityville. I mean, literally, this is a cash cow, especially for the films. And also, in a very sad and strange turn of events, Jay Anson, the author of the novel, he passed away before he could really get any residual or any income from the movies or the book itself. I shouldn't laugh because it's sad. Somebody passes away, but it's just all very interesting. And in the movie, we had we had Lois Lane and Thanos' dad playing George and Kathy Lutz. And if you don't know who that is, Lois Lane, Margot Kidder, of course. And Thanos was played by Josh Brolin. Well, James Brolin was his dad, and he played George Lutz. So, it was all a very fun, tongue-in-cheek horror film. Of course, Hollywood takes creative license, and the oozing walls became huge, and it all became just so very Hollywood. But that's not to say that these people, this family, did not come across anything at least something that was at least fearful for them to leave in 28 days. Now, so later on down the road, little Ronald DeFeo Jr. just jumps right back in. He states that he knew the Lutz, he knew the author, and he went along with the story that this happened, and there was evil in the home, in a red room in the basement. The list kind of goes on. Look, I'm not going to say that was true or untrue, but I can tell you that Ronald DeFeo Jr., he was a known drug addict, had problems with heroin, with meth, and a lot of different things, and he was probably very, very out of it when all this was happening. When I say out of it, if you've ever seen anybody in the midst of a drug struggle like that, there's a very obvious change in their persona and their attitude, and he was probably delusional, to be quite honest with you. But so he basically states he knew the Lutzes, and this was all a big cash grab. The Lutzes were drug addicts themselves, and that he knew about it, and he went along with the story so he can make money. But none of that could be really corroborated. I think it's left up to interpretation whether you want to believe, the Lutzes, or whether you want to believe DeFeo. I mean, none of it's great. I mean, to be quite honest with you, in reality, this home at 112 Avenue, it was a suburban house, and some real evil happened in it. A family was terrorized. I mean, you got to remember, this family purchased this home with the DeFeo family furniture still in it. Now, whether you believe in attachment or not, these people were murdered in this home, and their furniture was still there. And I hope, I don't know for sure, but I hope that they were smart enough to have the beds gone. And I'm sure that was probably locked up in some sort of evidence. But, if you believe in attachment, my gosh, you got their furniture. Now, personally, I believe if I was murdered, God, I only hope that never happens. But if I were murdered, let's just say this microphone I'm doing this podcast on, I would think my spirit may have some attachment to this microphone because I've spent so much time speaking into it. But on the contrary of that, if I was murdered in a home and all my furniture was there from where I was murdered, I don't think I want to hang around there either. So, a lot of this is left up to interpretation. Now, there was some really neat legacy things that ended up happening. I think one of the things that I find very interesting is that you had some very, very critically acclaimed demonologists by the name of, and I'm sure you've heard of him, Ed and Lorraine Warren. So on the night of March 6th of 1976, the house was investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they took some crew with them, Station Channel 5 in New York, and a reporter. And during the course of investigation, there was a series of time-lapse photographs taken. Now, there were some people in there. There was reporters in there, and you would like to think there was no contamination of evidence, but the photograph, it states that there was a depicted demonic boy with glowing eyes. Now, to me, it looked a lot like somebody peeking around the side of a room, the doorway of a room, that wore glasses. And if a picture is taken, you're going to get that reflection that kind of looks like a glowing eyes. Now, I wasn't there. We don't know. Anything can happen, but that's just the way I see it. Now, if you look at these photographs, and believe me, they're out there, you can research the demon boy from the Amityville, or I should just say from the investigation of the home at 112 Ocean, and you can see these photographs. And there was also some things being done there. They took a parapsychologist, Hans Holzer. He did a walkthrough and said there was malevolent spirits in the house, and that, it was possessed by demonic possession. So, there was some interesting things that did happen in that home, but was it also a cash grab? I mean, you got to figure at that particular point in time, there was a lot of money being thrown at movies that depicted this kind of thing, the haunted house thing, the horror films, and Ed and Lorraine, they were fantastic demonologists, and whether you believe what they experienced or not, but they were very well known, but they weren't broke either. So, I mean, it just kind of depends on how you feel about it. And as far as the Lutzes, unfortunately, they didn't make it too much longer. They ended up moving to California, and I'm originally from the West Coast, and I did live in California for a little while, but they moved to San Diego, and that's where they lived. And I remember hearing of these two, but, of course, I never ran into them, but, they didn't live a great life really after that. Kathleen died in 2004. She died of emphysema, and George died in 2006, not too long after that, of heart disease. The couple had divorced, but they were still in pretty good terms. But, they had a rough go of it afterwards. And, unfortunately, they were either wrapped up into this huge cash cow, or they could have just, been part of a big sinister plot to dupe us all. Who knows? But, the house still exists today. Now, the numbering of it has changed. I won't put it out there because you can look this up and find out what it is. But I'm sure the homeowners that are there now would really prefer not to have to deal with this. And I also want to kind of state, Amityville is an absolute beautiful area. It's very calm. The people are very nice. Yes, I have gone through there before. Unfortunately, I have not gone to the home. Didn't have that kind of time when I was there. But, if you're ever in the area, please remember these are families that are entrenched in this community, and they're very fun-loving and very caring community. Now, an interesting topic of note. 4 times the house is sold since the murders. None of the subsequent families, with the exception of the Lutz, ever reported any paranormal activity. So, now, it's up to you to interpret how you feel about it. What do you think? Do you think that the Lutzes were just money-hungry people that came up with this outrageous story and had a book deal, and they knew about it? They knew about it when the house came for sale. They thought, hey, let's buy this thing at a lower amount, let's publicize it, and then let's just make a ton of money out of it. Or do you think the Lutzes were victims of a very dark history of a home, and there was a lot of residual energy? Do you think DeFeo and the Lutzes knew each other? All that's very interesting to think about and ponder. But then again, that's for you to decide. And that's a wrap on this episode of Generation X Paranormal. We want to thank you for joining us on the journey. Whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or somewhere in between, you're part of the GXP family now. This show is hosted by me, Nicole Mathias. We produce this independently with a whole lot of caffeine and an occasional EVP. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to rate us, review us, or follow us on your favorite podcast app. And believe me, guys, it helps more than you know. Visit us on gxparanormal.com. You can also follow us on the socials. Just search Generation X Paranormal. Until next time, keep your feet on the ground, your eyes on the skies, and don't be afraid of the dark. Be curious about it.